All right, guys, welcome to another night of virtual happy hour where we try to escape the nonsense that is COVID-19 and bring a little bit of fun, a little bit of knowledge, a little bit of, just relief from that, and where we get to talk to a lot of cool people. Tonight's guest is a bard of brands for a golden age of spirits. He has received the highest commendation for the Whiskey Magazine's 2014 World of Whiskey, and he is the author of the complete whiskey course, which you can pick up now, and we will discuss the best way to buy that at the end of this. His name is Robin Robinson. Robin, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Great. Yeah, thanks for having me on, Drew. Yeah.
Of course. So doing the deep dive and looking into your past and your history, your first kind of break in the history into the industry was actually an acting gig where you pretended to be from Scotland, and in like kind of the ultimate situation of fake it till you make it. Are there still times now where you feel like you're just pretending and you're hoping nobody figures you out?
Every fucking day, right? So, yeah, that's a great question. Boy, yeah. I mean, first of all, and here's the thing, so now that you got a book behind you, and you kind of go out on author tours, and people start introducing me as an expert, and I can tell you, I cringe from that word. I cringe from that word like a distiller should cringe from the word master distiller. And one of the reasons I cringe from it is because I've learned, especially in this industry, that there is no real expertise, because we haven't really defined what that realm is. And now you go to Scotland, they don't know anything about what they do in bourbon, and go to Kentucky, they don't give a shit about what's going on in Scotland, And even in the age of the internet, there are people who know an enormous amount about their jobs, and this industry is filled with people who are incredibly smart, incredibly passionate, incredibly have in-depth insights into the production and the maturation, the whole history. But I've yet to meet a real expert. And so these people who've spent their lives in the industry, and me, I'm a fucking carpetbagger compared to that,
Yeah.
I came in from other industries with a lifelong passion, and I got an opportunity to come in. So yeah. Yeah, am I faking it? Hell yeah. But like the old Penn and Teller, I'm ready to give up what the magic acts like in the background.
Yeah, well, I definitely agree with you, and there's for sure that level of cringe that I feel a lot when I hear different terms like that. And I was making a joke a few weeks ago. It's like, the spirits industry is the only industry where you can be an expert just because people know that you like something a lot. It's really bizarre.
Oh my God. You will make my head explode just by saying that, and that's, I'm an influencer with 10,000 followers, and then suddenly I've got expertise that's sort of grafted on the side of my head right here, as if it were like a large goiter, and yeah, and it's living in a time of inflated titles, so yeah, so I don't know how ever to describe myself as just somebody who is fortunate enough to work and make a living in an industry talking about and dealing with something I love. And man, I mean, that to me is like, to me, that's the highest amount of success is
Yeah.
that.
Totally. I had one person explain to me, like when it came to agave, it's like you'll really get to know agave when you realize how much you don't know. And I was like, I think that's a perfect way to sum that up,
Yeah,
because
it's
there's so much.
Socratic.
Yeah.
It's very Socratic. I was explaining the Socratic method to someone the other day, and they said, I don't know. I said, oh, good, you got it.
So from that acting gig, you start to really kind of fall in love with whiskey and stuff like that, and you end up starting a whiskey club in Silicon
Yeah,
Valley. And that led to events, that led to a blog, and all these different things, and now you have whiskey clubs all over the United States. And they continue to bring people in and do these different tastings and stuff like that. And I'm curious now, because was that really a new concept when you started it off, or was it something that you were kind of building off of other things? And then when you look at whiskey clubs now, or any spirits club for that matter, do you see them like making mistakes? Are you like, oh, don't do it like that, or try to do it like this? I mean, what's your feeling on those?
well, first of all, the whole idea of a club was just really a collection of people who were interested in one thing.
Hmm.
And quite honestly, we couldn't get a ticket to Whiskey Fest that year because it was sold out. And I was droning on and on and on about Scotch whiskey to all my friends. Really, they weren't any further than maybe a Johnny Walker Black every once in a while.
Hmm.
And so they just got sick and tired of hearing me talk about Scotch whiskey. And one guy said, well, if we can't get a ticket to that Whiskey Fest, let's have our own whiskey festival. And yeah, that's awesome. And that's kind of how the club got started, and then it sort of went from there. Um, uh, I don't know that there are rules for clubs or even any guidelines. Um, Again, what is it? It's a collection of people who have an interest or a passion in one particular subject. The only thing that I advise is to, and I'll just come right out here and say it. I don't care. Yeah, some of these clubs like Facebook, I mean, these are some of the most obnoxious motherfuckers in the world. And I'm all about getting down into like the details about stuff, but some of these, right now it's really about flippers, about, where's the price right now? What am I flipping? And, how could you pay that much for this bottle when I got this 10 years ago for this? I mean, like, well, who cares? So, and then that's not really about a common interest any longer, then it's more dicks, swinging dicks and stuff like that. And that's uninteresting in any subject, let alone whiskey or spirits or anything, I was there for the wine boom, the California wine boom. I was there I saw that whole thing happen. And eventually it became the province of the affluent, that's when I was during my Silicon Valley days when I used to go to these dinners and with crazy wines there, insane wines at that time, and they were the status markers of that time period. And now, it's whiskey. Whiskey becomes the status marker. And, drinks have always been our gateway to affluence, our gateway to kind of present ourselves as what we want to be or what we want people to see ourselves at. And so right now, whiskey's having its moment with that. And so when people come together and have clubs, I don't know that there's a right thing or wrong. I mean, don't get into a fight, I think is probably a good, you know.
That's a different kind of
um,
club. That's a different kind of club.
yeah, right. It's a different club. Don't bring sharp objects. Like, in the book, I talk about pairing foods. with whiskey tastings, and don't have food that you have to have implements like chopsticks or like like oyster knives, because they just don't mix well with whiskey. So anything short of that, I think, is an okay, so,
That's it's good to know. Hey, we got to take any tips that we can get. So we're
yeah.
going to fast forward a bit in terms of your career. And one of the things I came across today was in 2016, you wrote an article about the Masters of Whiskey program being ended by Diageo. And you highlighted the disconnect between being an ambassador and actually making sales, and how it was pretty much it doomed itself, the program, and the way that it was set up. And I just I found that there was like a lot of just connections to kind of what we're going through today, and how we're going to be entering this environment where we might not be able to do events or anything like that for a while. And I'm just curious, you saw that unfold back in 2016, and now you're looking at this current situation. What do you think the future is for brand ambassadors in this industry?
So the only reason I got into this industry, I was given an option. I was given an opening. I was given an opportunity to come into the industry to change the industry. That was the only reason I was happily selling, and gritting my teeth at night. I was selling, high tech, um, um, mission critical business systems, from small little Silicon Valley companies, and competing against the big guys. And I love technology. I mean, I consider my part of my heart is to be is also as a technologist as well. And but the idea was this, and the person who brought me into the industry is a very highly placed person in the industry. And he said, look, the brand ambassador is the least, how did he put it? It's the least, oh shit, there was a word he used. It wasn't being as effective as it could be. And he gave me the history of brand ambassadors, and brand ambassadors go back to the 1950s. And the reason they call them ambassadors, I later found out, was because Madison Avenue and the brand new United Nations were both coming of age at the same time in the same part of New York City, on the east side of New York City. And there was this confluence of all these international people coming from all over the world, now living in New York and dining, having parties. And Madison Avenue, the madmen of those days who were kind of creating the consumer culture that we now live in today, they were integrating with each other, to the point where the word ambassador became sort of like, they brought it over from, from that, and infused it into the sales and marketing regimes of that day. The brand ambassador back in those days drove the sale. They drove adoption. They were an integrated part of sales and marketing, because sales and marketing were two sides of the same coin. And what happened during the 60s with the introduction of big data, for example, with computers, also with a lot of psychological profiling that was done, is that sales and marketing slowly went like this. So that by the time you got into the 1980s, marketing started making a move toward the C level of organizations. So a lot of people in marketing actually moved their way up into the C levels. Well, sales actually ended up going out over here as part of the execution arm. So these guys are driving strategy. These guys are driving execution. By the time I was in Silicon Valley in the 90s and in the early 2000s, sales and marketing lived on two different floors of the office. And at the end of every quarter, if there was a dip in profit, what they did was point fingers at each other. And so that was typical of the entire world in business. You know, an accounting degree turned into a business degree, and that degree turned into a specialization in a master's level in marketing. So these two worlds are going, and in the liquor industry, that was particularly evident with the fall of the really huge companies like Shenley and Seagram's, when all of those things were actually bound up in one thing, and the way that the Gallo, you know, used to go. And when all of that fell apart in the late 90s and the early 2000s, and then you had this big flux of all these tiny little brands, first in the United States and now from all over the world, it completely changed the dynamic. When the brand ambassador got reintroduced into the liquor culture, it was the cultural brand ambassador, and particularly you can probably point to one man who was Evan Knock, who was the distiller at the Cardew Distillery, and he was brought up, you know, a great Scotsman like this here, you know, and they present a great type of a cultural identity. And Evan was a fabulous, wonderful, you know, really bigger than life guy. And then he trained this whole set of U.S. brand ambassadors. That was, you know, Marty Duffy and Simon and Rick Edwards and all those guys, and Steve Beal. And then they went out, and then suddenly all of the brands immediately needed to get a brand ambassador. And when you're over in gins, you had Simon Ford, and they were like very, you know, affable bartenders with a lot of talent. And suddenly brand ambassadors became just show people and presenters and entertainers and educators. And why I was brought into the industry, that was the word, unfulfilled. That was the word. He said it's the most unfulfilled road, because he said if somebody can go out there in the marketplace and do the education and do the entertaining and do all of that, and still, as a salesperson with a salesperson's mentality, drive the sale, get up in the morning, work the numbers, set the budgets, do the whole distributor thing, go out there for the day, do the thing at night, and then get back up in the morning and do that same thing again in front of an Excel spreadsheet. He goes, that guy could change the industry. And that's when I said, I'm interested. And that's how I dove in. I dove in with the one and he said, okay, I put together like a presentation for him. He showed it around his company. He goes, look, I'm going to put you in front of Diageo and Pernod Ricard. I want you to show them this, because there's nobody in the industry thinking like this right now. And I said, I love that idea, but I don't like the idea of getting in front of big companies, because I'm not a big company guy. I'm a small brand guy. I worked for Silicon Valley companies, never worked for Oracle or never worked for Microsoft, you know. And he goes, well, you like Compass Box, don't you? And I said, yeah, I love Compass Box. He goes, let me set you up. The next thing I know, I came in as the Compass Box brand ambassador, and eventually morphed into the Compass Box brand manager, sales manager, brand manager, you know, brand ambassador, you know, event person. You know, it was like a one-man band, me and John Glazer. And, but that's always been my thought. The reason is because a brand ambassador is part of the marketing budget. And what is the marketing budget? It's spend based on budget projections. And if you don't make that spend, then that gets cut. And you're typically only, you're tied to the person who sets the budget. If that person moves on or goes somewhere else, then that budget gets moved around again. So as you look in the liquor industry over the past 20 years, brand ambassadors mean less and less and less and less, because what they're not doing is they're not presenting to the top line. They are a bottom line cost. And when you're a bottom line cost, as soon as you get a little bit of a dip in the profits, the first thing to do is they start shaving that stuff off. It's only when you present yourself to the top line And that's what salespeople do. Salespeople are revenue generators, right? So it's always been my position that, and I apologize for this long, around the world um, answer to your question.
No, it's great.
But
Keep going.
so now, in regards to where we're going, that's definitely the model. To me, the brand ambassador, the solely as a brand ambassador, is completely dead.
Yeah.
It's completely dead. And it has to be, because the company has to survive. When with Compass Box, I was the entire marketing budget, was what I was being paid, right? We had no money for anything, it was really bare bones. And yet, that's a very much of a bootstrapping mentality that I think really needs to get readopted. So, right now, I'm currently a sales and marketing consultant for small brands, and this is what I preach. Find me a salesperson who can tell a good story, that has a personality, or find me a person who's a brand ambassador that knows how to sell. That's the person I'm looking for, because that person has got to touch top line, not just be a bottom line expense. And now, at the end of this COVID, we all know, we don't know what it looks like, but we all know that there is going to be a reshaping of the industry, of many industries, and but if you look at any business model will tell you, you got to bring in money, and you have to bring in more money than you spend. And that means everybody's got a price on their head. Everybody's got a price on their head, right? Every employee in an organization, there's a number there, and this is what you're worth to the company. And the more that you can actually touch the top line, the better your price is.
Yeah, and so speaking of like the smaller brands that you're working with, and kind of building on what you just said, I mean, and I know it's kind of like a guessing game right now, because we don't know really what this industry is going to look like, in a month. But given your experience and stuff like that, what do you think these smaller brands should be doing right now, in order to, without giving away everything, because obviously that's how you get paid these days, but just a little bit of insight into like what you think these smaller brands should be doing to survive this pandemic and ultimately grow from it.
Well, I lecture frequently on this, ADI and ACSAs don't really have any, and a lot of this stuff is actually up on my website as well. So I've got no problem exposing what my thought process is.
Okay, cool.
Thinking lean is the number one thing that people have to think right now. What happened? I had a great conversation with Todd Leopold about 10 years ago, and Todd said, "Man, there's a lot of stupid money coming into this industry right now, because a lot of it was being offered to him, and the ethos of Leopold Brothers is, we bootstrap this, we do this on our own power with our own family, and we don't take all that, we don't want it, and so their approach was, it's almost impossible to do that, but you have to think small, and you have to think local. So my big mantra has always been own your own backyard. So, and I've worked with brands, and they can tell you can go look at the list of my customers, my former clients. The first thing I tell everybody is, what makes you think you should be in this market? Why are you there? The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull you back. If you're from Montana, you should own Montana. And then you own the Dakotas and jump over to Idaho. because you're looking for the lowest cost of sale in order to actually promote your products when you don't have any brand identification at all. You've got no marketing budget. So you've got to make it small, and you have to focus all of your attention on the accounts that are going to actually help grow you. I remember taking on one of my first clients. He showed me his number sheet. He goes, I've got 250 PODs in Manhattan, points of distribution. I said, wow, that's really impressive. Then I took a look at the numbers. I said, but only 8% of them are pulling through. So you've got liquid all over the place, and it's not doing anything for you. You essentially had somebody that go out and say, drop all this stuff in as many places as possible so that the first pallet went through. That is a common rookie mistake. And that's a rookie mistake in every industry. I mean, in Silicon Valley, that was a rookie mistake, right? You target your audience, you target where you want to go, and you target that with a precision, because it's still an industry where, where relationships do count. People want to see you. If I drop off a couple cases at the liquor store, they never see me again. I've got no brand presence in that liquor store, right? Same thing with a bar. I got to go back over and over and over again in order to keep that thing alive. And in a way, what you're doing is you're throwing your elbows out against other competitive brands that want that spot behind the bar, or they want that spot on the shelf. And then once you have that solid, then the market is telling you, okay, now you can grow. And then once you have, so you think about it like in concentric circles. This is my target. I've now fulfilled. I'm looking at my numbers over a period of a year, let's say, and I say, okay, I'm pretty solid here. I'm kind of getting like, regular depletions, regular orders here. From now, I'll go out and look for 25 more. And then I'm going to look for 25 more. And then you get organic growth that way, right? And then that keeps your cost of sales down. And it intensifies the impact of your brand on the places that are using it. So that when you go into that bar, that's my bar, because everybody knows the brand there and they use it all the time. That's my liquor store. This is my backyard. I own my backyard. And it's just good, it's good business practice to do that. The second thing is, in any downturn, no matter what it is, and business typically goes in cycles. In any downturn, the first thing that a company should be doing is thinking, how do I retool to actually meet the upswing when the upswing comes? What in my organization right now needs to be rethought, rejiggered, reevaluated, shaved off, and onto? And that's the thought process that you have to go through, and you base it on the data that you have up to that point. So for me right now, the thing that I advise existing brands is, this is a time for evaluation about what you want to look like when we come out of this. We have no idea what that looks like, but my guess is that you're going to have to start thinking small and tight. And if the market says, okay, man, we're going to open up, well, there's nothing wrong with going small and tight and opening up like that, as opposed to actually coming out big like this and then having to shrink. So that would be kind of like, the way that I'm looking at this, and what I think people need to evaluate for when we come out of this.
Totally. Yeah. So one of the things that I've tried to do over the years, because I started as a brand ambassador for Diageo, of all things, but as much as I love my brands, and as much as I really love the stories and everything that you're talking about, I try to get to a point where I do take some more of the romantic side out of it. And there's things that I hold on to, and there's things that I can't get rid of. And then when I started coming across a lot of your teachings and stuff like that, when I heard you describe certain things, I was like, oh my God, he totally just shattered my whole world on this. But it was great. It was really, really great. And so the one that you completely shattered for me was
Jesus. I need I need a drink. Hold on.
no. You're gonna love it. You're gonna love it because I'm pragmatic about this stuff. I want to learn, and I want different ways of looking at it. And you totally demystified terroir and whiskey for me. And then you introduced a new concept, which to me made more sense. So I was hoping what you could do for everybody listening tonight is, can you explain your terroir versus provenance thought process when it comes to whiskey?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so it's like this little mini crusade that I've got. Uh, so um, I'm a big believer in words. I've loved words my entire life. I make my living. I've always made my living in working with words. So I'm in love with language, and I love what language is about and what language is, the importance of language and what it's supposed to convey. And so with that, language is made up of thoughts and phrases and words. And these are the building blocks of how we convey information to each other. So that's really the basis. There is a principled language basis to my argument with terroir. So I don't speak French, but I did enough research to understand that terroir literally means of or from the earth. Makes perfect sense, right? Terra, in Latin, it means earth. So terroir means from the earth. And when it was first being used in the description of wine, then we think about what is wine, okay? So wine is essentially a natural product that goes through a natural process and turns into something else. It's fruit that goes through natural fermentation using, yeast that are actually gathered on the skin of the fruit that turn it into something else. And you can walk this back for 25,000, 30,000 years in mankind, in having fruit that went bad and it became something else. So the idea of terroir, meaning of the earth, and when I first got into the alcohol industry, it was French wine. That's actually all you drank. It was before even the ascendance of California wines. And so when you think about what France was doing, there is an appellation for Bordeaux. There's one for Burgundy, and in Bordeaux there are sub-appellations. So a Graves wine, a Pomerol, and they are specifically given that AOC because of the conditions that happen that grow that natural product that affect that natural change, which is the fermentation. Wine is made whether or not someone is there or not, right? All I have to do is put some grapes into a jar and let it sit for a while, and I've got a rough wine. I've got fermented grape. Fair enough. What does the winemaker do? He gently shepherds a natural process. That's what a winemaker does. And when he stands in his field drinking his wine, there is certainly a sense that the flinty slope of Graves produced this type of quality in this grape that turned this into this wine. And I can taste that. And it's a very wonderfully romantic notion. And that's the number one thing we should think about this. It's a romantic notion, as it should be. There's a lot of romance about wine. It goes back, centuries. And in my book, I list, these are the number of processes that go from a grape to your glass. And there's about 4 different things that happen there. Whiskey is a manufactured item. And when you talk about manufacturing, what does manufacturing mean? Manufacturing is taking raw products and transforming them into something else to the desire of the end person who wants it, would be like in most times a customer. And I grew up in a mill town. I grew up in Pittsburgh. I used to work in the mills. I know what manufacturing is. I used to work in factories as a kid. When I was in Silicon Valley, most of my customers were manufacturing companies. So I understand what manufacturing is. It's a transformation of raw materials into something completely different. Why is, in the United States, a distillery, why do they need a DSP? Because the federal government understands it as a manufacturing facility in which raw ingredients are going to be transformed into something completely different. Whiskey is a manufactured item. All spirits are manufactured. They don't happen naturally. There's nothing that happens with a spirit naturally. Man has to go in there and make a lot of decisions on how to transform these raw ingredients. So if you take the whiskey making process, and let's just take it from a Scottish perspective, from malting, right, until your glass, there are a minimum 15 different transformational processes going on there, in which minimum 3, and you could argue 4 of them, are actually chemical changes with the raw product. You're actually making chemical change. Now, when you're making chemical change at a molecular level, what you're talking about, the end result, this thing tastes like this because this happened to it, that's provenance. As I went around and asked so in research for the book, I could have written the book from my home, but I wanted to go back out into the world of whiskey and start now really get in-depth insights from the people who made whiskey. And typically I held up a round circle and I said, mark off that circle as if it were a piece of pie. How much of this influence is wood? How much of this is water? How much of this is grain? How much of this is manufacturing? And I'm going to tell you, grain came in at about less than 5% around the world. Around the world, right? Grain comes in, the water came in next to it, 4 to 5%, and the water is the other part of terroir that's goofy. So the word is provenance, and provenance means of the origin. So that means, here, that's Glenmorangie. That's Kleinleach. You know how far they are from each other?
How far?
They're about 50 miles. They're in the same area of Scotland. There's not one goddamn thing of these whiskeys that is similar, other than they're Scotch whiskey made from 100% malted barley. Okay. There's not a goddamn thing, right? They're completely, absolutely 100% different. And it's mostly because of all of the decisions were made, from everything from the malting process to the to making the wort, to the grinding. When you start grinding grain, you're actually doing it with a certain amount of a percentage of grist versus flour versus hull, right? And then how hot is the water, and then you do a 4th sparge, and then the fermentation time. And in Scotland you have to do an underback because you can't do artificial cooling. And then you've got the size of your still, and how am I pressing that through? At what pressure am I doing this? What temperature am I doing this? Does my still have a boil ball on it? It's a really high neck. What's going on right there? How do I make my cuts? Every one of these is a chemical transformation, right? So when people argue terroir, I get what they're trying to do. They're trying to say there's a uniqueness about this, but that's not the right word. That's Mark Rainier's word. And Mark Rainier was a, he was a wine merchant who became an independent bottler. And when he opened up Bruichladdich, he wanted it to be of place, which I get it, right? But it's not terroir, because now there's peat terroir, now there's wood terroir. How many terroirs can you have, right? But when you put that all together, it's provenance. That allows this to be absolutely unique from this. Absolutely unique. And it's all the decisions that are made. It's, the French call it savoir-faire. You know what savoir-faire means from a French distiller's perspective? Is that all of the knowledge that they brought to making this fine cognac or this fine Armagnac. So when you say terroir, you're essentially saying to the distiller, you really had no real part in this. It's really all about the grain and how I grew it, which, the evidence out there doesn't support it. So that's pretty much the argument. Provenance is a wonderful word. Every distillery can have provenance. It's all the decisions that are made in order to make this manufactured item, but grain has such a small part to do with it.
And you definitely have a believer in me, but just to put this out there, when it comes to other spirits,
I need one other person. You know what? If we get three, if we get three people, if we have a movement.
Oh, we got Elijah too. We got Elijah's on our team also, so we got three.
All right, Elijah. Yeah.
So when it comes to something like I don't know how familiar you are with like mezcal, do you think that there's anything that exists within other spirits, or do you think that this kind of crusade is a little bit more reserved for whiskey because there are more steps, or what do you think?
It's distilled item, and a distilled item is you're making chemical changes inside as part of the process.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I get it. There's a provenance. There is a provenance. I don't know why they're pushing back on that. Provenance means everything that happened here, as opposed to that place over there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it actually does make a lot of sense because there's there's for sure different mezcaleros that are like right next to each other that their stuff tastes completely different. So I think provenance is the right word. Plus, I also want to like try to work in the winemaker like gently shepherding grapes through the wine process. I want to try to work that into more conversations because that's just like a really fun thing to say. So I appreciate that at the very minimum. And again, I think you do take that approach of where there's certainly lots of romantic notions to this process and to whiskey and stuff like that. But another thing that you've talked about, and actually this was brought to my attention by our compatriot in our quest against terroir, Elijah, earlier today, and it was talking about how the 5 whiskey regions is actually just like a marketing thing and not necessarily something that we should really hold on to dearly in a romantic way. So can you expand upon that a little bit, or like what makes that a more marketing term than anything else? Oh, we're getting more examples. See, we're touching all the right buttons tonight, guys, because we're getting him motivated. He's grabbing more stuff. This is great.
You had to ask, didn't you?
Well, okay. I got time, so.
I want to thank Ryan Maloney up at Julio's in Westboro, Massachusetts, for actually putting this on a map like this. But I came across this early on in my own whiskey quest. You gotta remember, my whiskey quest started back before there was an internet. And I came across this, and I looked at it. I had no idea what the fuck it meant, so I just kind of put it away, right? And right, because I don't know, I mean, we had very little internet, and you were just kind of figuring things out for yourself. And then it was with John Glazer in the first year. I was actually the first I worked for him. I was at the blending studio, and he was taking me through a whole blending protocol to kind of give me an idea of what it is that he does. And he showed me this book that he had. And he goes, "You want to take this and just send it back to me." And what it was it was the insider's blender's guide for UDV, for United Distillers and Vintners. And UDV is with UDV got together with Grand Metropolitan, and then they merged with Guinness, and that's what became Diageo. Okay. And remembering that blends is what runs Scotland, right? So we're about 92%, maybe 90% of all the whiskey that comes out of Scotland comes out in the form of a blend. 90% of the output of practically every distillery in Scotland actually goes toward to the blending. And the whole idea of single malts is a relatively new phenomenon. Trace it back to maybe Glenfiddich in 1964 or something like that. And then there was a trickle after that. And then there was this big push. And then the big push was a Johnny Walker push, and as well, the classic malts of Scotland, which created as a way to teach Americans, especially, about why they should care about Scotland and about different areas of Scotland in which these whiskeys come from that taste specifically like this place. So it was a brilliant marketing campaign. And they created, we got one that comes from this region, one's from this region, one from this region, one from this region, right? Well, what happened was that took hold, and then that became, once it gets on the internet, that where everything is true, then it becomes, part of the overall mindset. And next thing you know, you've got people out there saying, well, I only drink Highlands, or I'm a Speyside man. I'm going, what the fuck does that mean? But this is essentially, this is the truth, right? Now, take a look at this, and it looks like the metro map of Washington, D.C. But what are you seeing here?
It's all distilleries.
That's all distilleries. And each distillery is on a line. And each line is, and it's not printed here on this map, but each one of these lines is accorded a style, and it's typically heavy A, heavy B, heavy medium A, heavy medium B. And so from the blender perspective, the whole point of this is this: if I'm using 40 different whiskeys in order to make one of the most valuable blends out in the industry, and consistency is always my goal, right? In order to have a commercial viability, then I have to make sure that my supply line is coming in with as much regularity as possible, which means that if I'm pulling whiskeys from that yellow section right there, right? So there's Highland Park. Look what's right next to it, Glenmorangie, right? Yeah. Then you have Glen Ord down there. Because from a blender's perspective, and what we're talking about here is the raw juice, not the aged, not the matured whiskey, but the raw juice itself. This is what this is all about. That they're all the same, right? So what happens? So what does the blender do? I can't really get, I'm not really, either they're not producing enough, I can't really get the barrels that I want right here. I'm just going to go down the track and I'm going to pull barrels from here, or go down the track and pull barrels from here in order to get something similar so I can, keep the consistency in my blend. That's the truth about Scotch whiskey right there.
Yeah.
Right. the whole idea of the regions was a brilliant marketing program in order to introduce, you know, a single from different areas. When you look back at some early texts, there were only 4 regions back there. They didn't even grant Speyside its own region, because Speyside is just part of the Highlands, right? And there was 1 or 2 more lowland distilleries, but lowland distilleries were mostly grain distilleries. And Campbellton, right? Geez, right? You know, they had 30 at one time, and they're down to like 3, right? I don't even know how they get their own. But you know, the whole idea of, you know, why isn't Talisker an Isla? Only because it's not on Isla, right? And what the hell's Bunnahabhain? What the hell's Bunnahabhain doing there? And what's going on over there at Benriach? And why are they pulling that crap off? You know, and all. So you start looking at all of this, and you realize that a Highland whiskey is Scapa, and a Highland whiskey is Deanston, and they don't have a thing anywhere near each other, right? They're 2 completely different things.
Right.
So that's the other sort of the myth of Scotch whiskey that I think that more and more people should be thinking about, because, and here's why. That's a brilliant whiskey. And the story held within that story of Kleinleach and this particular 14-year-old is a brilliant enough story. Why layer on this idea of a regional style? You know, it doesn't have a regional style. You go to Japan, there's no regional style there, right? You go to Yamazaki, they define whiskey from a Yamazaki perspective, and they have 12 different stills to make whatever kind of whiskey they want, you know, and they don't pay any attention to what they're doing in Nika, and they're making Japanese whiskey that's completely unlike Yamazaki or anything at Suntory, you know, but it's all manufacturing. It's all manufacturing decisions that are made in each one of those, you know.
Yeah.
So, you know, that becomes, you know, for me, that's the defining thing. When, you know, people make decisions to make whiskey, and when you start making decisions, you're putting your own thought process and your own cultural. And one of my big questions I have for all the distillers is, what's impacting? Why does this taste like this? You know, how much cultural influence? How much of the company is telling you to do this? And the only ones who were actually the most open about that was Nika. Who told me that, you know, and you know, they work from a Japanese principle of Kaizen, they don't move unless marketing is part of that. So the blender and production and marketing, they're actually all unified. And I thought that was a brilliant approach, you know, and they were absolutely transparent about the whole idea. As you know, marketing had this idea, and so we decided to test against that, and here's what we came up with. And then we put it into production, and they changed it this way, and it came out this way. And it's like, man, that's a phenomenal story, you know. And why can't we go with that, you know?
Right.
So,
Are those, do you know if those Metro like maps, are those still like available to get, or is that something that just has gone with?
dude, I could be fucking killed for having this, right? Okay, right? I had to
Fair
get this
enough.
from Julian. I had to get this from Julian Assange, right? You know, whiskey leaks, right? Actually, and here's the thing: Brian actually has this. I mean, Ryan has this painted on his wall in the area below his store. His store is like this massive 50,000 foot store, and then down below he has a massive event space. And in the lecture section of the, he has this actually printed on his wall. He actually has it on his t-shirts too, and I got a couple t-shirts. So yeah, if you hit up Ryan Maloney up at Julio's, you could probably, he'd be more than happy to, and so, you know, Ryan gets it, right? And Ryan's a real, Brian knows Ryan. Ryan's he's a real whiskey aficionado, and but he's a good retailer as well. So he's not going to be rocking the boats, except he has this damn thing on his wall. I'm telling you, it's massive. It's like a 30 by 10-foot wall that he has it painted on. So
Oh,
yeah.
that's cool. Well, and so sticking with the theme of just demystifying what people think is romantic, I wanna move on to your book. And there was this really phenomenal post that you did, um, about the process of the book. And in that, like, you went like step by step of, like, I didn't go after this book. They approached me about it. And in fact, you're like, and I was the second choice, which I thought was just hilarious. I like this guy a lot. Like, the amount of honesty that goes into it, like, that totally gets it. And so, I know you've touched a little bit on, like, your process, and you could have written it from home, but you did do the travel. But, like, what were some of the things that went into this book that you weren't expecting, that you're just kind of like, it's like, oh man, that was either really great or that really sucked, and I hope I don't have to do that again.
Um, I was totally blown away by Scotch whiskey. I mean, by Canadian whiskey. I'll tell you that right now. I went in thinking, oh my God, Canadian whiskey is going to be a 5-page chapter.
Yeah.
And Canadian whiskey. So I famously overwrote the book. My editor said, "Don't worry about word count, just write." And so and then he later said I'll never do that with an author again. I was contracted for 40,000 words. I handed in a 150,000 word manuscript, right? So he goes, "Do you realize how much editing is going to take place here?" I said, "Well, that's what you do, right?" He goes, "No, that's what you're going to do, because in your contract, you specifically said that you wanted to make sure you were the final voice. So then you're going to do the editing." So that was kind of a brutal, ugly process of taking my beautiful words and paring them down. But the biggest chapter that I pared down was Canadian. I was blown away by Canadian whiskey. Now, I grew up in Pittsburgh at a time when Canadian whiskeys was pretty much, you went into a bar and somebody poured you a VO and they called it rye, right? And that's what everybody thought it was. That's rye. No, it's actually VO. It's a blended Canadian whiskey. And but so my thoughts about Canadian whiskey was like, oh geez, this is going to be, and I was blown away. I was absolutely flabbergasted at what Canadian whiskey was, and then what it is right now, and the trajectory that it actually has in the future. I mean, I think Canadian whiskey is going to have its moment, and it's going to be massive. So that was my biggest surprise, was Canadian whiskey.
Okay.
Yeah. Was there anything? There was nothing that I encountered except the really big guy who I was squeezed into an airplane seat next to, going from Frankfurt to Mumbai. That was about the only. This guy was so big. there was, and I'm 6'1", and so here am I, like this whole from Frankfurt to Mumbai. I'm going, I don't know if I could actually make it through this flight. That was that was about it. India was a revelation. Japan was Japan, just was. I walked into Yamazaki, and I'd been reading about Yamazaki for years. And it was like I walked into the distillery, and it was like, oh my God, I'm like in a temple. It was like walking into a temple. And there was this beauty and harmony and symmetry and elegance in this massive manufacturing complex, that it was just overwhelming. And the second the other emotional moment I had was actually walking into the Tekatsuru's living area at Nika. So I was granted access to their home, and that was overwhelming. I'd been reading about their love story, and I'd been reading about their story for years and years and years, and now here I am at Yoichi, and on a really cold, wintry day in February, and everything is just encased in snow and ice, and I'm led upstairs into their living quarters, and which is a museum, and the closet with their clothing hanging in the closet, and their steamer trunks and their luggage with their initials in it, and there's plum pudding in a big ceramic jar that apparently Rita had been making in the weeks before that she died, and that was in 1961. So what I learned was that plum pudding keeps a long time,
No kidding.
in a cold environment, right? But it was it was emotionally affecting to me to have be granted that access. It was really something. So yeah, there was really a lot of getting to speak with Rachel Berry, who had been sort of like one of my secret heroes of the industry for the longest time, because Rachel Berry, I've always thought that Rachel is going to save Scotch whiskey from itself. She's a 28-year veteran of the industry, and she has the passion and the enthusiasm of like somebody who just got into the industry, and she's a dead-ahead scientist, and she's pretty awesome. So yeah, there was there was a lot of really great surprising things that I had a talk with Brent Elliott at Four Roses, and in the middle of the discussion, Brent says, "This is so great. I never get to talk about this stuff." Because mostly people come in and they want to get the standard, this and this and this and this. And part of my setup, to get appointments with them is that I don't want the plumbing tour. I've been to over 170 distilleries in my life. I know how the plumbing works. I want to talk with the whiskey makers in their place of employment, talking about how and why they do what they do. And unfortunately, a lot of that got cut out as well. So, the goal of the book was to be as comprehensive and authoritative, but accessible. And that was a struggle for me, because I'll jump down into a rabbit hole of nerdism with anybody. And that's most of the stuff that actually had to be excised from the book. I was constantly challenged by my editors to bring it up another level. So hopefully I became a better writer, I can tell you that, because I learned how to write with a lot more economy, and pack a sentence or a paragraph with as much information as possible and still make it a readable paragraph. Because I've got 27 whiskey books upstairs, and I can tell you they're hard to read. They're difficult to read, because they're just they're too dense,
Yeah.
And the whole point of this book was to make a book that was readable, that was accessible, that you could pick it up and put it down, pick it up and put it down, and still get something from it, still get something out of it, so.
So Catherine just asked, will volume 2 be the uncut version? We get like the director's cut of the book.
It'd be great. Well, so just to give you a background on the book, the complete whiskey course is the third book in a trifecta of alcoholic beverages. The original course was written by a guy named Kevin Zraly at Windows on the World restaurant, and over 30 years ago. And that was the Windows on the World complete wine course. And Kevin, at that time, oversaw the biggest wine collection in the United States and quite possibly the world. And he was tasked by that by the owner of Windows on the World at that time, a guy named Joe Baum. And then to teach classes there, he used to teach wine classes there. He was a young guy, he was in his 20s. And I came and took a class from him when I first moved to New York. And it was an expensive class. And his book came out of there. His book is now sold over 3 million copies worldwide. And then Sterling, who publishes the book, about 10 years ago, sought out a named Joshua Bernstein to write the complete beer course book. And again, it was based on 10 or 12 courses, each one covering something, a different aspect of either wine or beer. And then it took him about 6 years, but one of the editors, my editor, my first editor, kept needling them and said, you know what, you got to complete this. Whiskey's big right now. You got to get somebody to actually write the whiskey course, and then we've got whiskey, beer, and wine, all three, and we got the entire thing. And so when they got the green light, then they went looking for someone to write it, and they naturally went to somebody else because that person has a higher profile than I do, and we're both in New York, and and I'm not sure exactly what happened. The deal fell down. It just didn't work out, and they had to go looking for somebody else. That's kind of how they walk into my classroom.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was gonna ask you, how do you sell the book to somebody new? And I think you just covered all of it. And if the past hour wasn't a great sales pitch for the book, I don't know what was. So I
Hey,
know
ABC always be closing, right?
Well, I definitely think we're gonna get a couple sales out of this for you. So now, before I open it up to the rest of people to ask questions, if they're if they have any, I just have a couple. We were just referred to as like the rapid fire questions. So now I know you might not be capable of a rapid fire answer, but we'll see how you fare.
I need a drink. Okay.
Okay, yeah. Pour yourself another drink, and we'll start it. There's only a few, so it's not too crazy.
Okay, go.
All right, all-time favorite whiskey.
Okay. All-time favorite whiskey with John Glazer's 2008 edition of Flaming Heart. Yeah.
Okay, preferred method that you want people to buy your book.
Preferred method? It's irrelevant. Your local bookseller.
Okay. What are you drinking if you're not drinking whiskey?
Oh my, beer.
What kind of beer?
Right now I'm on hazy IPAs right now. And it's like I go through these phases, So
It's a pretty basic beer for beer drinkers right now. You're following the trends. So
not purposely. Not purposely. I actually saw that and I said, I said to the guy, I said, what's hazy IPA? He goes, it's unfiltered. I said, boy, that sounds like it might have some juice to it. And it does. And I said, oh shit, this is my new favorite. It's my new favorite.
That's funny. I'm not a big on beer, but I remember talking to my buddies about hazy IPAs. They're like, it's just lazy brewers. That's what it is. And I was like, I love it. That's pretty funny. And then final question. If you ever write a book again, it's of course going to be your memoir. What's the title of your memoir?
Well, I'm sorry. Say it again.
What's the title of the memoir that you will eventually write?
Oh, the title of the memoir. Oh, I already know what it is. Okay. It's called Continue Reading. Shit that I wrote in Facebook posts that people said I should write into a book.
That's my favorite answer so far to that question. That's awesome. So
Elijah got a kick out of that one.
that's you hit all the right buttons with him. So do we have any questions from anybody that we have listening right now? Elijah, do you have any questions? Brian, Catherine, Greg, anybody have any questions for Robin at this point? You can unmute yourself, or you can. Okay, Brian's got a question.
There we go. Hi, how are you, Robin?
Hi, Brian.
Question for you. Coming out of COVID, what is your opinion of where the industry should stand on either trying to maintain some kind of relationship with the mom and pop store versus the big white box store? Because in my opinion, in general, the big white box store is almost able to get into cahoots and eliminate the competition and cause a huge amount of mushrooming. The big white box store only cares about the top movers. You know, I mean, I don't know if you heard recently, but 500 and I want to say some odd number of products are being removed from one of the control states lists of.
Sounds like Michigan.
Not Michigan, another one out west. Okay, they're shrinking what lines and brands and all the rest of it.
Utah, yeah, right.
Yep, 500 and some odd different brands are, and we're not talking just little guys. We're talking some big boys are being eliminated. So I guess my question is, how do we deal, or how do you think is going to what's going to come out with our mom and pops going to be preserved at all? Are they going to disappear completely? Is it going to become the world of the totals and the binnies and the specs?
I think like everything else, it goes state by state. So, for example, you know, in New York State, it's a single license state, right? So you can't have more than one. You can't have more than one liquor license under one entity. Now, people found ways to kind of shimmy around that. But so when you have states like that put a premium on single licenses, that prevents that. Total Wine, you know, hey, look, you know, there's an argument to be made for and against any type of an operation. Total Wine right now is only national liquor chain, right? Because everything else is based. The biggest prior to that, the biggest actually was Bevmo in California and Specs in Texas, right? And everybody had their problems with Specs and Bevmo as well, right? All the small they would gobble, and Binny's, you know, and Binny's in Chicago. So Brian, honestly, I have no idea what the end. All I can tell you is this: that we're in a time, and it's unprecedented, and I'm starting to hate that word. We're in a time when we're in flux, and there's going to be a lot of things that fall out. We know that small distillers are going to fall out. They're not going to be able to make this. And I don't think anyone's really going to know until the end of 2020 and maybe even 2021. That's actually when I think the economic shit's going to hit the fan. But yeah, I think small businesses, you know, hey, look, I was talking to a wholesaler, and the wholesaler told me that they anticipate that anywhere between 75 and 80% of their receivables are gone. Now, what does that tell you? That tells you that the liquor industry has been running on such a small, paper-thin margin. I'm talking about off-premise and on-premise, right? that a wholesaler doesn't think they're going to be able to recover up to 80% of their receivables. Well, that's going to shake up the wholesaler too. So yeah, I think the people who were economically shaky or that had just been getting by are probably the ones that are going to get hurt. And I don't know. I mean, do we want a world full of Total Wines? Probably not. You know, but yeah, that's
See,
I don't know.
that's what brings up my idea or questioning of brand ambassadoring, et cetera, because if you get out to the smaller stores that aren't getting the attention that Total does because the Total gets a truckload of XYZ brand product, I think at this time they're going to be more receptive to you because those smaller stores realize that they've got to be different and have that niche, if you will, that the big box store is going to the Walmart of the world is going to lose.
Well, that was certainly the case even prior to this, right? That was certainly the case prior to this. So when you went to the single stores that were able to have a more of a niche market,
Yeah.
Or actually when you went into the cities, and this, when you go into the cities that weren't often visited by the big brands, right? You actually got much attention. Your sales actually were your cost, your cost per sale went down because you were able to get people around that. That's not going to change. It's just that I don't think it's going to take a while. And hey, look, I'm guessing at this.
It's all we can do.
Yeah, it's going to take a while until February's normal comes back. After that, I don't know. So
thanks for the attention, Robin.
Yeah.
Best to you.
And then Catherine was, how can people connect with you either through Instagram or Facebook?
Okay, I'll be honest with you. I've got 214 people who want to be my Facebook friend that I have not answered them, and it's nothing personal. You can follow me on Facebook. You can follow me at Robin Robinson LLC. You can follow me on Story of Whiskey, which is another one of my Facebook pages. Right now, I'm starting to look at, I'm having second thoughts about what Facebook is all about, and so I'm trying to pull that world in a little bit. My Instagram, I try to be as active as possible on Instagram because it's pictures, and that's a lot easier, and so that's at Robin Robinson. So it's Robin Robinson LLC or the Story of Whiskey on Facebook. LinkedIn, how about this? I'm incredibly active on LinkedIn. And because I go back in the tech industry when LinkedIn was founded, I found out that I am one of the first 100,000 members of LinkedIn. Now, LinkedIn has over 500 million people linked into it. But I was in there and I got the email from the CEO of LinkedIn, I think the month before they went public, telling me that. He gave me my number. It's 97,000, something like that. So I'm actually I'm pretty hooked into LinkedIn. I like LinkedIn a lot. It doesn't have, some of the bullshit that Facebook does. Facebook ends up becoming my blog posts. Also, I have a post on WordPress called Robin Robinson LLC, and I call it Bile, B-I-L-E, where I get to rant about shit. And I just haven't figured out how to get Bile connected. So it's under that. So that's how you can find me.
Nice. Do we have any other questions for Robin while we still have him?
Really quick. Well, I don't know if this will be really quick, but just being honest.
Already, I like this guy already. He already knows me.
Yeah. The Japanese whiskey section here that I've read through actually a few times, because I've read like David Broom stuff, Whiskey Rising stuff on stuff. This is one of my favorite, like, just comprehensive Japanese like writings on here, like for Japanese whiskey, covering Japanese whiskey. And I remember at one of the tastings that I went to of yours, and you kind of were talking about master distillers versus like you said it was a cringy word, but like the master blenders and the importance of blending. And I feel like you're the first person in the industry that I've heard that hasn't bagged on Japanese whiskey in the way that I feel like the rest of the industry is. And it's like this whole thing is like, what's real Japanese whiskey? And I work for a company that, we and Drew as well, we distribute, rice Japanese whiskey, Oishi, Fukano, so there's all these, like, I can't tell you how many times I hear that, like, what's real Japanese whiskey, like, and it seems like people don't know the history. And I wanted to see if maybe you can expand on that and kind of some of your thoughts. Just, yeah.
Well, when you get to know Japan, and the thing is, when you get to know anything about Japanese whiskey, then you are obliged to get to know Japan, because Japanese culture comes out in every one of their products. I don't care if it's an automobile or a bowling ball or whiskey. There is Japanese culture that's invested in that. And I am no expert on Japanese culture, but I recognize enough of it that it's very difficult and quite honestly insulting to make commentary on their products unless you have an understanding of the cultural influences that went into it. And so, to me, and what I've learned is, and this goes back to the beginnings of Japan, and this goes back to the tea culture as well, is that the art of bringing disparate things together in order to create a harmonious whole is really the thing to think about. And that's what everyone who makes spirits and sake and tea and cars, that's what they're investing into this. They're investing an enormous amount of cultural history in the production of products. And so when it comes to whiskey, we got spoiled on was listening to the not Jim Murray himself, but the reverberations that Jim Murray's review Yamazaki 22-year-old in a whiskey in a sherry barrel created, which was a run on something that no one cared about, right? And this happened in a very, very short amount of time during the midst of this whiskey boom. And so we, hey, look, 1999, if I went into any bar in the world and asked 100 people what goes into whiskey, I'd get maybe 2 right answers, okay? Because no one knew, no one cared, no one gave a shit, right? But so now we're in like this compressed time of I got to know every detail, and there whiskey and Japanese whiskey comes up in that. Japanese whiskey, and I just write that in the book. It's what the whiskey maker thinks it is. It's what he says it is. Because they don't have a code of federal regulations like we do. They've got a whole bunch of matrix of confusing laws. But they honor tradition more than anything else, and they are, Tori was a compounder. He was trained as a pharmaceutical compounder, and blending becomes what it's all about. Mm-hmm. It becomes the idea, I'm going to take this, and this, and I'm going to make a harmonious whole out of it. And in the United States, rice qualifies as a cereal grain, so it's whiskey. But it's not Nika, and it's not Yamazaki, and it's not, Shido, right? But it's still whiskey. Now, here's the only problem I have with the whole thing, is that is a compelling story, you see. But I think too many people are apologizing that it's not what they think it is. And some people are using absolute fucking, subterfuge in presenting it as what it isn't. The compelling story is it's a grain. It ferments a different way. You have to use a koji. Let's talk about a koji, right? White and koji, black koji. Yep. Soshu's made the same way. Then it's aged in a barrel. It's whiskey. It's just different. It's really what the blender pulls together. The harmonious, bringing together of all these different elements to make this thing. It's a compelling story. And unfortunately, it's one that has to be, you're pushing up against, it's like the Dutch boy with a finger in the dike. You're pushing up against a tide on this. But I've tasted them. I think they're terrific. Are they Nika? Are they Suntory? No, they're not. Completely different. That's okay. Bourbon and rye are two different things. Wheat whiskey is a different thing, right? So, I'm all for it. I mean, I like those brands. I like all those brands, Fukano and Oishi, and I don't like the ones that are trying to masquerade as something that they're not. That's some bullshit. And we all know that there's one brand out there that does that, and I don't have a problem, outing that brand either, but yeah, so. It's the end of the night here, man. Yeah, I'm liable to say almost anything. Right?
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah. Do we have any other questions? Okay. Well, Robin, thank you so much, man. This was really great. I know for me and Elijah, we're gonna do whatever we can to get some Metro posters. So if we find a source,
get the T-shirt, man. Get the T-shirt.
Hey,
I should have worn the T-shirt. Instead, I wore the first software company that I ever belonged to, which I will tell you really kind of set the pace for me about how companies should operate. This was called Vantive. It was based in Santa Clara. I went to work for them in 1998. And I worked for them until we got acquired by PeopleSoft. And this company, to me, I still have so much affection for this company. I was only in them for 2 years, and it was a tech company, but it represented everything that you would want as far as cohesion, as far as like engaged leadership, as far as solving problems out in the marketplace. In a esprit de corps. It was fantastic. So, and this is actually so damn comfortable. So I've kept this.
But I say, like, it's got a couple of years on it, but it looks like it still looks great. Got years on it.
Yeah, it still does, man. It still holds up, and zips up. I can do that, so yeah. Hey, listen, hey, Drew, this was great, man. This was an indulgence for me. So, I mean, you've been wonderful in indulging me here. So this, I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
I really appreciate you saying that, man. This has been a lot of fun for me, and I've met a lot of new people, and I've developed a lot of new relationships, and I hope that when the time comes and we're able to all hang out together, I can put away the hangups I have about not being your Facebook friend and just be your real friend, and
or Drew, if you're on that list, I'm bringing you in. Okay, right?
I think I am, but we'll see.
I quit looking. I just noticed that, oh my God, I got a whole queue of people who want to be my friend. I don't know, now I go into a whole thing, so.
Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. But Robin, thank you so much. Like I said, we'll get this uploaded to YouTube as well. I hope you sell all the books. I'm a couple of chapters in. I look forward to reading the rest of it, and especially after tonight, man, I'm super jazzed for it. I mean, you're just such a wealth of information, and you're so generous with it. I think we're truly lucky to have people like you in the industry who are not tied to one brand, but just an advocate for everything. And I think that's just rad. And I love that mentality towards it. So everybody stay healthy, stay safe. If you want to do this again tomorrow, 12 o'clock Pacific Standard Time, I'm talking to Knud Strand. He's going to be in France. So we're going international again. We're
Awesome.
going to be talking South African rum. It's going to be really crazy.
Ooh.
Oh,
yeah.
That sounds great.
It's like drinking jet fuel is when I've had it. So it's really, really cool stuff. In a good way, But yeah, exactly like that. But again, you guys, thank you so much. This was a really, really great evening. Robin, you are fucking awesome, man. I really, really love this. I look forward to talking with you again. Everybody, cheers, and have a good night.
Okay.
Thanks, Drew. Thanks, Robin.
Cheers, guys.
My pleasure.